What's up, Gromies? Welcome to AROYA Office Hours, your source for free cannabis cultivation education. I am your moderator, Keisha, and this is episode 100, y'all. Shout out to our live viewers on the Hangout, on YouTube, and on Instagram, and to everyone tapping in on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for your support. If you like the pod, be sure to drop us a review because we really appreciate your feedback. Seth and Jason, how you guys doing? Can you believe it's our 100th episode?
Flew by. It's hard to believe.
It's been a good time.
Yes. All right. Well, in honor of this milestone, we're mixing things up. You want to tell everybody who's on the Hangout today?
Yeah, we got Tyler and Bryan from Front Row. Super excited to have them. I think Tyler was one of the very first cultivators that I saw down there in Humboldt way back in the days. Might have been 2018, I think. So always a pleasure to have him, and good to have Bryan on the call too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Tyler and Bryan, please introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to be here as well on the 100th episode. And it is funny thinking about it. 2018 started working with AROYA, and here we are, which is really cool. So my name's Tyler. I've been in the cannabis industry for about 13 years now, focusing on operations, design, and consulting, and with a particular interest in, controlled environment agriculture and finding ways to quantitatively improve what we're doing over time. In cannabis, I've made every mistake you can possibly make, but I've tried to learn from them and make less mistakes over time, become less wrong. And before I was in cannabis, I was in strength conditioning, where, I started to notice there's some interesting parallels between human performance and plant performance, and also how human performance impacts plant performance in your cultivation facilities, which we'll get to talk a little bit about today.
Beautiful. And how about you, Bryan?
My name's Bryan Willkomm. Been in the cannabis industry for about 13 years. Managed some California cannabis dispensaries, cultivation facility, distribution, and processing. And I've been working with the Front Row Ag team on our dry soluble powdered nutrients for about 3 years. And actually was on a track and field team with Tyler in college. So it's a coincidence that we've come back together in the professional world. And in addition to my time working with the sales team here, I've been coaching track and field collegiately for 14 years. And so we have a lot of interesting overlap, like Tyler was saying, in our observations of successful cultivation managers and how their health and wellness actually incorporate into their success in the garden. And so we appreciate you kind of entertaining our topic here.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you both for your super interesting backgrounds. I had no idea. Yeah, so let's get into it. So basically, we started Office Hours almost 2.5 years ago. It's as an educational resource for cannabis cultivators. The community has really shown up, asking questions and sharing their stories and their data, with the goal of ultimately helping everyone learn and succeed. But there's an underlying subtext to all this, right, that we don't really talk about. And it's the fact that people in this industry are dealing with incredible odds, high production costs, regulatory policy hurdles, heavy taxation, that's just to name a few. And at the end of the day, they just want to grow this plant so that more patients and consumers can have access to good quality medicine. So when the stakes are this high, it can really take a toll. So we wanted to spend our 100th episode talking about successful cultivation habits, applying the lens of mental health. Tyler, I'm going to start with you. How about kicking things off by telling us a little bit about why this is top of mind for you and Bryan?
Yeah, what I mentioned a minute ago, it's become clear over the years that you could have the best protocol ever, but unless you've got buy-in and happy people who can consistently execute what you're doing over the long term, what you want them to do, that you're just not doing things as effectively as you could be. And it's your performance at a facility is going to suffer. And beyond that, the reason that we're all in this for one reason or another, the reason anybody's in any job is because they're trying to support a life and lifestyle for themselves, their families, their colleagues. And I think it's good to kind of connect what we're doing sometimes back into why are we doing this? What are we getting out of it? And how is it good for the people that are involved too?
Yeah, and in my work with the sales team and managing the sales team, so often we end up jumping into conversations with our prospective customers that end up skirting a topic about mental health, about them being overwhelmed or them having fears of failing and needing additional support just to stay above board. And, just like you were talking about, Keisha, the immense amount of stress that we're in the industry, there's just some habits that Tyler and I started to observe that certain individuals and companies were taking that were putting them into more successful positions long term. And I think, again, all of our goal is to continue in this industry long term and not run into the burnout that many of us observe, your team included, I'm sure. And implementing some of these partnerships and these tools to help support our cultivation managers be successful.
Yeah. And we can get into some of the specifics here in a minute. I just kind of wanted to start off talking a little bit about like overall mindset that goes into this. Because I think it's something we forget to talk about a lot. And it makes a big difference of our actual experiences working in a cultivation facility and with our employees. And one of the things I like to remind everyone of is that we should treat ourselves and our colleagues with not only like the same respect and care as we're treating our plants, because everybody's feeling good if you're, averaging 100 grams per square foot in the garden, everything's going great. But it's not always that way. And it's important to like keep in mind the experience as we're going through this. And one of the things that just a high level mindset thing that I see, I think a lot of people lose track of, not just in cannabis, but in all sorts of professions, is that we get our identity so wrapped up in the success of our next harvest. We get like, you are not your next harvest is what it comes down to. And sometimes you're going to crush it and you're just going to be riding high because you're like, oh yeah, we hit 120 grams per square foot on this harvest. And, everything was sold before it even left the trim table. And that feels really good. But then you've got the times when something goes wrong and, you had an HVAC problem, your dehumidifiers went out the last 2 weeks of flower and, maybe you didn't have the best harvest. And when that happens, you're like, do you want your entire feelings of like validation and self-worth to be riding on the next thing that's happening or the latest harvest that you had? It's so easy for everybody to get caught up in that. So I like the idea of kind of keeping our identities small and diversified, not having it 100% wrapped up in your most recent performance, but also like balancing it out with the rest of your life, because we're cannabis cultivators. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a pretty competent one, but it's not the only thing about you. And it might not be the most interesting or valuable thing about you. So making sure that we've got, stock personally and validation from the other parts of our life helps kind of buffer us against the ups and downs, like the volatility of the experience in cannabis.
Yeah. So I used to always say, happy people, happy plants. And it goes hand in hand. When we're in a good cultivation facility, most all the time, the people are very, they're very excited to grow top quality product. All right. And obviously, people that aren't very happy at their work have much more difficult time producing a quality at a consistent rate. And I kind of want to just tap in on some of the things you were saying about the last run. One of the first things that I did was just really start making averages across my facility. And that was how do we say that we are improving over time without, constraining ourselves to, all right, what season it is, how many mistakes did we have during this cultivation cycle? And then when we did have a cultivation cycle, maybe I'm weird because I'm a fixer, but I actually loved seeing problems. It's like, all right, here's a problem. What tools do we have to diagnose this problem? And then even more importantly, after we've diagnosed it, what kind of resolution? How do we make improvements in what we are doing and how our equipment operate and how our people relate to each other? How do we make changes in that and implement it so that we can avoid those types of issues later on and have a little bit more consistent average on the long term?
Yeah, I think a big part of where this comes in is planning your production schedule. and just all of your operations also take into account humans. Some of the more successful grows I've seen out there don't actually operate like a 24/7 factory. They're adjusting certain dates because people are gone Saturday and Sunday, and they don't have the workforce over the weekend, let's say, to get that harvest done. So we're going 62 days instead of 60 maybe. But part of the key to that consistency is having a happy workforce and getting everyone into the right headspace where you find some satisfaction in what you're doing, not just what weed ends up in the bag at the end, right? If you base your whole identity on that, you're probably not in the right the right environment to have a happy life. Like, I always say, like, I've met a lot of people over the course of my career, and some of the happiest and most successful, like, those aren't mutually exclusive ideas. I think that's where some people kind of drop off a little bit. They think like, hey, to be successful, I'm going to, give up my whole social life or my whole happiness to do this. And like, that's really not true. Some of it's just that mindset and thinking like, hey, we need to organize things and all be on the same page to where, hey man, we're working to live, not living to work. And I think just having that little mindset shift helps a lot of people take a lot of satisfaction out of their job, and then also leave it behind a little bit. So when you come back after the weekend, you're fresh. And on the same token, if you can take a lot of satisfaction out of solving problems, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a successful career, because you're not having the down feelings and unproductive times just because you see failure. Like, failure is just a challenge. It's not necessarily like something to be depressed about. And failure comes in small failures, big failures. There's a range, right? And I think that's where a lot of people get lost and burn out in the industry. And then we see it too. If maybe you guys have definitely seen it, where there's a facility that's just running way too mechanically, way too hard, and they struggle to keep people around. They hire people and they're like, hey, 50% of our employees quit after 2 weeks. And it's like, well, I guess we got to figure out a way to make that a little better, dude, because there's not a cost-effective robot out there to do this job for you. This is a very hands-on, intensive industry that we're in. There's really no way around that at this point. Even if we all wanted to throw our plants out and not touch them till harvest, like, there's still people out there with pruning shears cutting plants down. We can't avoid that. And those people absolutely matter. If your workforce is unhappy, if they're overworked, if they're burnt out, that's when the ball gets dropped. That's when maintenance doesn't get kept up on. That's when people are too confident, not taking their readings, not documenting. And then suddenly you've kind of got this big mess that you've got to work backwards through.
And being in fertilizer sales, part of our process is we might have new build outs where everything could be perfected and planned for ahead, or we're going to be doing a nutrient conversion. And in that process, we're onboarding and we're learning about the challenges that our cultivators are facing, assisting them in overcoming. And in Tyler's role with my team, he's my technical expert, where I have escalations of those issues directly to Tyler. And we had a discussion actually about this concept of earned success and comparing that to the opposite of learned helplessness. And I think some people have always been in that situation where, like, I'm trying everything I can do, I can't seem to move forward. And that sense of learned helplessness is really degrading to your mental health. And sometimes by actually having those struggles, those challenges, and overcoming them, you earn this concept of earned success. And that's where I really appreciate teams like yourselves with the AROYA team, where you're providing a product and a service that allows us to gather data, refer to that data, and make these best decisions, and also taking the time to reflect on the mistakes, just like Jason was saying, and how to implement the improvements on the successive runs. It's growth, and some of the most successful people we've met are really the culmination of a ton of failures.
Yeah. Just to follow up on something you said about, the problems that we have, which I thought was just right on, Seth. It's like imagining that things will only be good once you have no problems left is a fiction, because there's always going to be problems. In fact, that's just what our brains do, is they create problems out of nowhere. But the key is, like, if you do things right and you learn from previous mistakes and you fix them and address them, then you have better problems over time. And sometimes that's the best way, to get that sense of earned success. You're overcoming problems, you've solved those ones, and you have this track record of being able to do that in cultivation. Gives you like the confidence to predict that you'll have future success. And the problems are going to keep happening. They're just going to be better problems than before. And that's good, and just to give a specific example of like some good problems to have, it's like you might make a change in your crop steering regimen or your fertilizer application, and all of a sudden, you're yielding 15% more. Well, here's a new problem. Now your dehumidifiers are not sized properly to handle that level of transpiration and the amount of flower mass that you've got. So you've got another problem. You're like, all right, now our environment's not matching up. But that's actually a good problem to have and another thing to work through. So I think we can kind of like, we want to get people in the mindset of thinking of like a chain of problems getting better over time.
Absolutely. And I mean, I always go back to, this is a human heavy industry. There's a lot of people making all of this weed that we all get to smoke eventually, right? Like it takes human hands, and you've got to keep those people happy. One of my buddies, Aaron over at Goldkind, really encapsulated with this one quote. And that was, man, I thought I was going to be growing weed, and now I'm just managing like 80 people's emotions. I feel like I'm like, yeah, dude, but that's a good problem, because that means, your rooms aren't burning down, your plants aren't dying. Like now everything's running smoothly. You realize that the biggest contribution that you're bringing to, every single morning is helping empower your employees to get the jobs done and making sure that they are in a good headspace, that they want to do it, that they feel like it's a good place to be, because, hey, at a certain size, you have to rely on those people. There is no other option. Like as a leader, if you can't get your team unified and get everyone on the same page, you're leaving efficiency on the table. And like I said, I don't know, Jason, have you heard of a good cost-effective robot to go prune plants yet? Because I haven't seen one that's I would trust to go out and do it.
No, absolutely not. And that mindset thing is really, really important. One of my favorite clients here back east, he said in a quote like, "Hey, Jason's he's my psychiatrist." I'm like, I may not even teach this guy anything on a call, but really what it is to break it down into that perspective of how do we need to attack this issue, and what's the severity of it? Should it be disrupting my mental state today, or is it something that we can use as a learning opportunity?
Yeah, and I think one thing, guys, that has been awesome for me, at least, working with AROYA, working with you guys, getting out and talking to so many different people, started to realize that there's a lot of kind of siloing going on coming out of the industry. Whether it's old school legacy growers that feel like they've got the magic sauce, don't want to give up their secrets, or on the flip side, some of these large corporations that are getting set up to grow that feel like they have internal IP with their processes and stuff. So I think realizing that, hey, that is the reality of the industry. And, if you can go out and make friends and, feel supported in the fact that, like we were talking about, hey, we upped our yield 15% and now we're, running into some humidity issues, maybe mold. I think a lot of people feel like that's they're like, oh man, I messed up. This is my problem. When in reality, like, dude, I heard that 100 times in the last 2 months. Like, what do we, you have average problems that are completely solvable. Like you can get by it. And so many times people just, miss the forest for the trees when they're looking at these problems, just because it's hard to step back sometimes once you're so deep in it. And if you don't have a network of friends that are also doing the same kind of thing and willing to communicate, it really, and sometimes that's all it takes, right? To walk into a different facility and go, hey, that's way different than the way I do it. That makes sense. Just never thought of that before.
You can usually buy
100%.
You can buy a lot of dehumidifiers for 15% increase in yield.
Yeah, exactly.
Well said. That ROI is high. I think something you said there really just reminded me of another thing I think is really important to mention. And, we're in an industry where like small things going wrong can create really large negative effects on our outcomes, right? So what that kind of fosters is this feeling you see in a lot of facilities and a lot of people who are extremely dedicated of like extreme vigilance, where they may be, having their phone on all night long, listening to notifications so they can, make changes, or be ready for a communication from somebody. And I think this is, in the short term, can be pretty effective, but in the long term is extremely corrosive to people's long-term performance and well-being. If only just because of it interferes with people's sleep. And if your employees or you are not getting enough quality sleep, then your decision making capacity is compromised. It's just like if you're doing crop steering, but you're doing it in a chronic low sleep state, you're crop steering like in an impaired way. And we do this all the time by leaving our phones on at night and our notifications on. And sometimes it's just what it takes. And I get it. Like we've all been there, and you just have to do that sometime to make sure you're successful, because there's a lot riding on the line. But I would encourage people to try to find a smart way to do that too, that walks the balance of like being able to be notified if something's going wrong or needs to be fixed, but try to filter out all of the things that can wait a day or two. You know, if a notification is not critical, try to set things up so that if you have to like respond to a notification outside of work hours, make sure it's something that's critical to respond to outside of work hours and not something that can wait a couple of days. And it's one of the things I love about AROYA is that like you get the best of both worlds here, because you can really set things up so that you're just getting notified when a certain parameter is going way out of bound in a catastrophic way, so that you can address it. But then you can be confident to know the rest of the time that like, I don't have to worry about it. You can take that time off to make sure that you're sleeping well and making the best decisions you possibly can. And it's just something I think is ubiquitous and like harmful in our industry, is just like how much we expect ourselves and other people to like constantly be on call for little things when there's a better way to do it.
Well, and that's part of that, building the support system and, developing the workflow, if you will, of escalation. And that's something that we have even made recommendations through nutrient onboarding, is we may have to just look at the way you're organizing your business, because so much is being put onto one individual that you're not able to ever turn off. And, the story that Tyler and I were telling is we've seen so many facilities where everybody is monitoring every single component of their plant, root zone, substrate, the nutrient profile, environment. And then I watch them go and grab 2 liters of Mountain Dew and just pound it and talk about, man, I just feel like crap lately and drank too much last night. And it's just like, how interesting of an observation to dedicate so much attention to the plant and neglect yourself. Up into, that support system, and having support to reach out for help when you need it, and organizing your team in a manner that there is an escalation workflow for these types of situations.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. For me, it's like when I talk about AROYA, we've got 3 pillars that make our product work. And when I think about our happy cultivation, when we're striving to get a facility to stability, we're looking at things like relationships, resources, and logistics. Right? Are we providing an environment that helps people, encourage each other? Are we providing an environment that gives them the tools that they need to learn more and stay on the stable track? And then also, are we making it easier for people to work? Especially when we're trying to get efficient and we're trying to make sure that our staff wants to stick around. Let's make these people's jobs as easy and enjoyable as possible.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes it's simple things. Like if you've got 20 rooms, do you want to have a 20-room cycle, or do you want to, block like 4 or 5 of those rooms together so that your harvests are manageable? Like, hey, maybe there's some trade-offs. We don't have a factory that's planting plants and harvesting every single day, but after you run it for a while, it's kind of nice to not have to transplant and harvest and pull dry weed, do the whole process every single day. So there's little trade-offs like that may seem monumental, but when you sit down and do the math on some of these moves, like the hours all pan out. All of these things still have to get done. We're just organizing it in a way where it's like, hey, if you guys don't want to work weekends, are you going to be happier? And if the answer is yes, okay, adapt your schedule so that you can keep your workforce happy, because there's only so much like any of us can do with our own 2 hands. At the end of the day, that's the reality. And as any cultivator knows, especially if you start to get up into the 1,500, 2,000 square foot plus rooms, man, it's like a lot of hours to get one task done, and setting yourself up on too tight of a timeline, it just causes you mental anguish. You lose sleep. Like you said, Bryan, if you're not healthy, if you're low on sleep, if your life is in health-wise disarray, you really don't tend to not make the wrong choices, but you're in a reactive, not a proactive state. We should be looking back, and this is something I find a lot of growers just haven't been in the habit to do because they're used to scrambling and being in that reactive state. But it's like, hey, man, if you can sit down at the end of a run and just look at all of your data, not just AROYA, but every other note, picture, everything, and just find out like, hey, what really was horrible that last run. And sometimes it's something like, hey, man, our emitters were plugging up a lot. Like, well, why are we talking then? You didn't change them yet? Like just set some of those rules. And then you go, like the emitter example, like, hey, after about a year, we see these things pretty out of line. Well, let's just be proactive about it and not stress this, because it seems like every time we let, a room go too long without an irrigation changeover, people quit because they have to come in at 6 a.m. They don't get to leave till 7 p.m. because they got plants wilting every morning and like their life is ostensibly terrible. And a lot of times if you have good people, they're going to make their life terrible when really it should be, if they're your employee, it should be your life that's terrible, but they're going to try to pick up that slack and burn out. And if you're not attentive, sometimes you might, some of your best employees might not complain about something like that. And then you end up burning them out and you're like, well, man, let's just solve the problem because, hey, you're a really hard worker. I like what you're doing, but let's, structure it so you can be more productive with your time rather than fix these problems that are entirely avoidable.
Yeah.
And also,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Tyler, we should comment about the experiences we've had that led us to start the Front Row Certified program.
Oh, for sure. Well, I was going to say, just to directly follow up on that, most people at some point maybe heard about this idea of like 3 levels of problem solving. There's like the first level, which is very reactive, like a problem happens and you scramble to fix it reactively as quickly as possible. And it can be stressful and really labor and intensive and costly. On the second level is like a problem happens and you fix it, but you also, redesign your systems to, fix that problem permanently so it doesn't happen again. And then the best and third level of problem solving is you try to predict the sets of problems that you might run into ahead of time and build fixes in ahead of time so that you prevent the problems from happening in the first place. Obviously, that's not possible for everything, but I think it's a good exercise for people to do is just like, okay, what are the problems that we can foresee as possibly happening here? Let's try to like build fixes or systems for those ahead of time so it's not an expensive and costly scramble every single time. And I mean, that's a big part about our technician training program. Bryan, tell them about that.
Well, yeah. So in the sales management role, I started to get frustrated hearing repeated problems at different facilities that were linked to a gap in training, essentially on water chemistry and the interaction of certain chemicals mixed in with whatever nutrient line you're using being the underlying issue. So a cultivation manager is bringing in somebody, and I've been in a facility where I literally watched somebody throwing a little bit of pH up, a little bit of pH down, a little bit more, mixing it, not waiting time to go, I don't know what's wrong. It's not changing. And so we found through our tech expert team and with the support of our product formulator, a technician training certification program where basically we wanted to review the basics of fertilizer fundamentals, water cleanliness, EC, pH, how to even read a label of a nutrient line that you're using to understand what is within it, and how to properly apply any type of chemical with whatever nutrient line you're using. Our goal was to mitigate the risk that these cultivation managers were running into by having just undertrained staff members and not always putting the burden on them to create that training. But hey, here's what we see as an industry standard. Here's what we gathered from both academia and our time in the field to give you an example of the best practices to set your team up for success. And it's a free service because what we find is that if we provide you the better baseline, you'll be more successful with our nutrient line or any nutrient line. And that's a direction that we tried to cultivate within our team, is empowering any of our customers to be better at their craft.
Yeah, go ahead, Keisha.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I love that. I wanted to also bring up, because it's come up in the last couple of episodes that we've done of the podcast, just like understanding, implementing effective solutions. Part of that means choosing your battles, identifying like what the main focus, where you really should be focusing your energy. Can you guys talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really nice to be able to look at like your potential risk surface area and both your potential for gains and your potential for downside risk, and make decisions in light of that. So sometimes there's changes that you can make that might offer a small potential, gain in your annual production, but on the other side, they might increase your downside risk, your risk of a crop loss or failure by a much larger margin, 15 or 20%. And so I think it's important to evaluate, like, where are we going to apply our efforts and make changes to our systems in a way where we really are paying attention to, are the upsides of this potential change worth the downside risk? Because there is usually going to be trade-offs in a lot of these areas.
Yeah, I always like to think of opportunity cost. Coming out of business school, it's like, all right, how much do we lose if we don't make these changes, if we don't invest in these systems? Sure, upfront costs, we're always going to do it, right? Like that. Let's take that 15% yield. What's our cost if we don't get the new dehumidifiers so that we can accommodate the 15% yield? Well, it might be 30 or 40% loss in mold now that the environment's not right. So what does that opportunity cost turn out to in ROI, and is it the right choice for your time and energy?
Yeah, and sometimes just looking at one thing I was taught in just basic farm economics. Always balance your decisions against what would that same amount of money do in a savings account. And that sounds kind of silly, but like there you might, if you put that rule into play, you might find like, hey, maybe I'm chasing this a little far. Just like you said, I'm pushing a level of risk that I might lose some, and then also the benefit just isn't there, even if this thing works out perfectly. Sometimes we're making decisions based on ego and interest. And unfortunately, like that sometimes is a difference between a garden and a farm. In my garden at home, I play around with all kinds of fun things, but I don't, that harvest doesn't affect whether that garden's there next year or not. So it's kind of one of the ugly downsides. A lot of people get into this industry with a lot of passion, and it's hard to reel back sometimes, but just like we were talking about the mental health aspect before, I think that's important, because some of the most passionate people that I meet are some of the people that, they have the hardest time letting go when there is a failure in the garden. And sometimes it is something that's completely not their fault. Like I've seen businesses that are running profitably well, they have a great crew, and then they get zoned out of existence. Like, what do you do at that point? You either pick up and move to a new place or accept it for what it is. But either way, your mental state's not going to affect the fact that your business is gone, and you got to do something about it. Right. So making sure that you're in really that happy spot is, I think it's just so critical. And it's not unique to cannabis either, right? Like any other industry any of us have worked in, we've all seen someone that just gets burned out on what they're doing. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, for us, it's the most passionate people in cannabis that get burnt out the hardest. And that's the people that's, to me, the most sad when I see them burn out, is I'm like, man, when you're doing good, you are happy. So like, let's cultivate a process that keeps you in that space. And then, yeah, man, you might have to drop a little ego. Like you're not harvesting 3.8 to 4.5 a light on all your strains. Well, okay, let's just look at the economics and figure out how much weed can you grow in this space? What kind of approximate values are we working with? And then build the rest of the business around that. Yeah,
like we always hear about reach the genetic potential of your cultivar, right? And it's also sometimes what's your facility's potential. And if you're reaching that potential, you need to take a moment to look at yourself as successful. And one of the ways that Tyler and I had discussed that minimizing the downside risk might be a simple question that a customer might ask us, hey, what media do you suggest that I run front row with, cocoa or rockwool? And often it's a question back, well, how good are you at monitoring your dry bag? Because there could be a huge downside to choosing rockwool versus cocoa if you're not prepared, to monitor closely.
You got 5 rooms on one feed line, direct injected. Well, let's maybe not go with rockwool, guys, like that. Like why? Well, just trust me, and well, I'll tell you what you need to do to get there, but let's not experience this crop loss, because that's a story you hear all the time in the last 5 to 10 years, right? Like, hey, I tried rockwool and my yields just got cut in half. It's like, well, you probably did it wrong. you know, no other way to put it. You messed up really early on. And it's a bummer that you had that experience, because had you been able to use it, you'd be able to give it a fair trial and decide like, hey, do I actually like this now that I know how to run it in the parameters where it performs? And, you know, just kind of the transition of the industry out of hand feel everything to actually using sensors. You know, a lot of us aren't. Your personal tuning, your personal measuring scale is only as good as the tool you've used to establish that scale. So while there's a lot of cultivators out there that do absolutely, you know, awesome, just picking up pots, holding their hand up, sensing the humidity, you know, you can't scale like that without going crazy, right? There's only so many of those people that can walk around and actually do that.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what you said there about ego, especially. And I view this as something that for all of us is, and for everybody involved, is a huge barrier to making good decisions. Sometimes, you know, we all have been in the place or know somebody who's been in the place of just not seeing reality for what it is, because they are defending this idea that like, I'm the best at this, like I crush it. And the methods that I use are definitely the best. And I think this is just so harmful, like to ourselves, you know, when we have this idea, because it prevents us from seeing what's actually going on, and it keeps us attached to old ways of doing things and like defending things that might not be the best way to actually do something. And it's a totally natural human response. And if we can recognize it in ourselves when we're having that response, and then just being like, okay, nope, I make mistakes all the time. And there's lots of people who maybe know more about this thing than I do. And instead of getting attached to any one specific methodology, technology, or anything, I'm just going to do what makes sense, what actually works. And like seeing clearly, having the tools and the frameworks to like fall back on for making those decisions is so valuable. Like your potential performance over the long term goes up so much, and in so many ways. And I know one of the things that's been huge is just, we all came from, you know, a background where every business was super isolated and insular. And now we're in an environment where we can just reach out and ask for help, you know, and just like being able to do that and just be like, yeah, I don't know this thing, you know, or this is not an area of my expertise, but I know someone who probably does. And we can reach out to people and then talk through something, and we can judge a problem or a question together and come out of it with a much better system or approach than we might have had before.
There's kind of some irony out there. I like benchmarking the productivity of clients, and it seems like the people that are the absolute most profitable and most productive are the ones that are most open to learning more. And so really the best of anybody in any industry are going to be the ones that are learning the fastest to get better.
Yeah, that's
absolutely
a good point. No, go ahead. I was just going to say, hey, we do something cyclical. You know how many, even if you're not like setting up an experiment with every run, as long as you're keeping up with some crop registration, pictures, data, talk to your people, you can glean so much from that. And I think, you know, being in that reactive state, it's really hard to notice that if you're not taking the time. But man, it's just so valuable to look back and actually learn from your mistakes. And then, yeah, don't freak out about it. You know, like I said, learn to take some pride and satisfaction in the actual things you're doing. If you're successful, the money will come. You know, that's how it's going to work out. If any business works out, it's going to be good. But it, you know, you really got to focus on what's going on now. And then that's the hardest thing, is to say, hey, you need to pour your heart and soul into this. And then, man, you got to take a vacation. You know, like to me, that's the ultimate sign of success as a, you know, if you're a cultivation lead or a manager at a facility, like, hey, can you take a week vacation and not have your phone blow up, or like, you know, have a weird sleep schedule in a different time zone? Cause you're like, I got to get up at 4 a.m. and check my graphs. Yeah. That's, to me, that's like one of the ultimate signs of success. Hey, you can leave, your crew's got you. You got good communication, good tools, like go relax, let it go. That's a good sign.
I love.
That's a perfect entry point because we got a poll here on YouTube. We asked, how do you spend time outside the garden? 33% responded that they travel, 22% general recreation, 44% they focus on self-improvement.
Nice.
Yeah.
So about the time that I met Tyler, I was working with another great cultivator actually up here in Washington. Back in the research phases of building out what their AROYA product would be, one of our questions was always, "Hey, what's your goal?" Right? What are your goals in here doing here at the facility? And most people are, quality, yield, profitability, productivity, and this guy was so dedicated. He just goes, "I just want a week vacation. That's my goal." And about a year and a half, 2 years later, he sent me a message and says, "Hey, we did it."
Yeah. Well, but then that's also our experiences, since the topic is, those successful tips for the cultivation manager. It's taking up that time to set up the SOP and the workflow and communication with your team so that you can. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that we've seen too from our sales team is having an escalation workflow from your garden hands, people in the garden day to day, if you're in the cultivation manager position, is ensuring that there is a workflow to listen to the feedback that's being provided from your frontline employees who are spending the most time in the garden. Too often we see a separation sometimes from the decision maker who truly isn't receiving all of the data that could benefit them long term and make the changes needed to be successful.
Yeah, it's I think probably a lot of businesses have caught on to this at this point, but because it's kind of like management 101 basics, but just like set up and make sure you're getting at least 30 minutes of one-on-one time with all of your direct reports each week, because you're going to learn a lot during those meetings that might not have come to your attention if you didn't have like a little bit of one-on-one time every week. So, your room managers, your cultivation techs, set aside that 30 minutes for you guys to meet one-on-one and just ask them, not only like what is going on in your life right now, because that's important too. It affects what they're doing in their jobs, but what are the things that are on their radar? What have they noticed recently in the rooms? Like, is there anything weird they've noticed? Do they have any ideas? Not only does that make people feel like their insights are being respected and heard, but you will learn things that absolutely improve the performance of your facility doing that. It's so simple and so effective.
Yeah. One of the vital things about becoming a manager or any type of leader in a facility is getting to a point of employee stability so that all right, is this an observation for our company to improve, or is this a complaint? And hopefully, when you've gotten to a point that you have happy employees, you start to realize that we're not wasting time with complaints. We're spending this time interpreting observations.
Yeah. And it's something I think that's oftentimes difficult to establish. But once you establish it, easy to maintain. And that's that trust where it's like, hey man, no, I don't care what the problem is. If it has to do with something breaking or going wrong for whatever reason in this facility, I want you to bring it to me. I'm not going to fire you. Like, I want to know the problem. That's so much more valuable to me than like I would ever be, have retribution towards you because I thought you caused it because you brought it to me, and I think that's a thing too that people get into. It's like there's this stress that kind of trickles down from the top. If you're too stressed about, thinking you're going to lose a crop and lose all this money, that trickles down and people are scared to bring up these problems that they know are going to affect that number you're talking about. So like some simple strategies where you just highlight to people like, hey guys, it's so much more valuable if we're all aware of these problems than if we try to mask it or hide it. Because guess what? We're going to weigh everything at the end anyways. We have these running numbers. Like it's going to get noticed, but if we don't have all the details, we can't solve it. Like if you're not taking notes, you don't know how often like the switch gear for your dehumidifier went down, let's say. And you're like, okay, how many guys, how many nights were we like at 0.3 VPD? You're just like, oh, I don't know. Like, well, it would be good to know that because the difference between 10 nights like that late in flower and 2 is probably pretty big. So I need to know like what kind of an impact, if something goes down, how long can I hold out on fixing it? The ideal answer is 0 time. The real answer is if it shuts down at 8 p.m. and doesn't come back on, can I go in? Can anyone go in until 6 a.m. or 8 a.m., whatever it is? And if that's the reality, like, okay, I want to know. That way down the line, when I look back and I say, oh, hey, this run was 2% lower, like what happens? The dehu in that room sucks. And usually cuts out for about 10% of the plant's life cycle. So we lose a couple percent yield. That's the correlation we can establish. Now I'm not worried about it. Now I just know so I can plan for it.
Yeah. Yeah. This seems so simple, but one of the specific things that can really help, your employees alert you to when things are going wrong is just having basic checklists, giving somebody, first off, like for anybody that works for you, setting like really clear expectations about what they're just directly responsible for and what their expectations are. And so that they're just not dealing with a lot of ambiguity about how they're supposed to be spending their time or what things are important. And then as part of that, to get more specific, having the right tools for them to rely on that allow them to, produce the outcomes that you want. And just like, it seems like the easiest and stupidest thing, but just having a checklist for somebody who like their first checks when they enter the garden every day, like go down and check these things, like literally check it off on a list, or if you make a checklist in AROYA, have them check it off on there. And if like one of those things isn't right, then it's just like, they notify you, like we'll get it fixed or something like that. I think we overlook these really simple tools sometimes. And a lot of it is like the curse of competence, because we've done things for so long that a whole bunch of knowledge becomes like completely implicit and intuitive, where it's just operating subconsciously in us. And when that happens, it actually becomes harder to teach. The more implicit and ingrained your knowledge is, the harder it is to like consciously think, what are the things that I know and do? How do I teach it to somebody else? Build the systems for that, and then give them the right tools so that they can do what you want them to do, whether it's like checklists or, I'm a big fan of having like our nice irrigation program calculator that lets you calculate out all of your event sizes, durations, and intervals for P1s and P2s, and just do it really fast, so it's always consistent. And then using the recipes and templates in AROYA, just like so huge. You can set it up so that you've got like everything preloaded in there, like the tasks, if they don't get done, the parameters, if they're out of line, then it. And it just makes things so much easier for everyone.
It's probably one of the most enjoyable things about our jobs is the fact that, we get to rely on scientists to kind of really stand behind what we're trying to share. It's not like we're inventing anything new. It's just really trying to make it interpretable for our clients, right? And some of the best agronomic calls that I've been on, I'm working with a long-term grower, typically not with much ego, and they'll be like, hey, after using AROYA for 3 months, 6 months, I had a feeling about something that was happening in the grow room or something about how plants are responding. And then they get super excited because now they've validated something that they felt as a grower, and they have the scientific backing or the data backing to be very confident that they were right or sometimes wrong.
Yeah, I think that's something that's important to, really pontificate on here. We're not just AROYA, but as an industry, the cannabis industry is embracing technology in a way and at an expense that like other parts of agriculture just aren't. And one of my favorite things about being engaged in that is watching people leverage technology to increase their productivity and improve their quality of life, because now they're able to, not only increase like the amount of weight they produce, the quality, but also the consistency, and that consistency yield to yield. Like I can't tell you how many growers I've talked to. They're just like, man, if I could just get 2.8 a light every time, like we've been up to 3.8, we've been down to 1.5, and we're just struggling to keep it the same. And sometimes, a little bit of technology goes a long ways into just, building the foundation of your business and helping make it efficient right off the bat. Because that's one thing in the cannabis industry, I think new build out versus new build out. It's getting better, but every company I've talked to, the tendency is to massively overhire right away or underhire, then overhire, then, do this fluctuation thing. And man, like even with AROYA, like managing customer service and client success, I leverage all kinds of tools to help me do mass emails and little bits of my job where I'm like, hey, I can cut down on a lot of hours here. I can reach more people and I can record things better. So, hey, that lets me be way more productive and takes a lot of stress off my plate because now I've got something helping me monitor that, helping me keep up to date with all my tasks and everything. And that eventually leads to me not having to work quite as long into the evening every day, right? Which ultimately feeds into that good feedback loop where, hey, I get to leave work at some point and, go do something that makes me happy.
Work doesn't make you happy?
There's a certain amount of satisfaction, but it's like we've been talking, there's a mental health aspect to not having your entire identity tied up in your livelihood.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me over the years, I've always kind of kept that mentality. And you know what? I've managed to stay employed and not have any major gaps in my adult career. Like I connect with better people and find more opportunities when I'm in that space. So that's why I always encourage people like, hey, just get your good basis and work hard. And then, endeavor to be interesting sometimes. Do cool stuff.
Wait. So you're telling me that you don't spend all of your free time outside of work just crop steering for fun?
No, strangely enough, dude. It's weird, right? But then when I hit it Monday, dude, I'm stoked. I've been away from it for 2 days.
He'll be out on the weekend doing raft steering instead.
Yeah, that's right. That season's coming up. Yeah.
This is such a wonderful conversation. Bryan and Tyler, I love that you brought this our way. Just to kind of close it out, you guys want to speak to some strategies for improving mental health, like just, whether it's personal that you do for yourself or just some general advice?
Well, I mean, working with my sales team, I prioritize their well-being because they're just so much more productive when they're in the right state of mind, well-rested, and feel empowered to do their job. And so one of the things that we really believe in is continuous improvement and continuous education. And so we're always looking to build the network, educate our team to be the best that they can be, and check in with them on what we call internally, is like their meds, their meditation, exercise, diet, sleep. These are important to you, just like they're important for our customers to monitor everything going on in their garden. It's kind of like checking in with yourself. And the specific, tips that we're trying to create here with the cultivation managers, and why we even brought this up as a topic, is because of how often we've been hearing these issues amongst our customer base, both prospective and current customers. And so there is no perfection necessarily, but it's really about the progress in the process. And I think that applies both in the garden and to our attempts to improve our well-being.
Yep. Well said. I'll just add on like a really broad note that when we think about, improving our own well-being, and the well-being of people around us, there's very broadly, there's two approaches, the two ways you can go about it. One of them is the external approach, which is where you go and you take agency in the world to manipulate the world around you to, create the conditions that are compatible with you being happy, and satisfied. And that's the external side, is like, I'm going to do all of these things and I'm going to set the world in a way that I'll be happy and have a lot of well-being in. And then the other complete strategy is the internal ways, which is reorganizing your mindset and your internal thought patterns and processes so that you're already less stressed and more comfortable with the way things already are, becoming more comfortable and more at ease with the way the world actually is. And so neither one of these is enough all by itself. We should be doing both of them. And I think for people, just keep an eye out if you end up getting stuck only doing one or only doing the other one, and try to think about like, where do I have the opportunity to create the best improvements in well-being? Is it by, frantically manipulating the external world more? Or do I need to go sit down and, spend 15 minutes doing mindfulness every day?
Absolutely. The way I've been putting into people is sometimes you need to wake up and run away from your problems for a little bit, literally, and then come back to it, like that's what it takes, man. Like get yourself in the right headspace. It will improve your life so much. And, as enthusiastic and that's one thing I love about working in this industry compared to traditional ag where I came from many years ago, like the amount of passion I meet with cannabis growers versus wheat growers, for instance, or guys who grow garbanzo beans it's incomparable. But it sets them up for so much more disappointment when they fail. And it's like, man, you really gotta balance that, because ultimately what you're doing is cool. It is fun. There's a scientific aspect. We have a lot of problems we get to solve. But yeah, if you burn out on it, now you're also in a spot where you invested a lot of time into a really niche industry. And unless you're going to go grow berries or something along those lines, another hydroponic system, there's not a lot of transfer over. If you put 8 years of your life into this and you were a plumber before, do you want to go back to that? I mean, maybe not. Like, that's still a good skill you can transfer around, but also right back to that, I think that's something to think about anytime anyone's looking at any career period. Is like, what is the long-term satisfaction here? And plan on it. Because to me, running a cultivation facility represents, if you can have a sustainable business, a pretty good career and life opportunity compared to a lot of other jobs out there, and it all comes down to planning and systems, right? This isn't the most complicated business to be in, but you can really make it stressful for yourself if you don't plan well.
100%. I'll add on one thing there, which is just, I think it's always good if we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're all less important than we feel like. It's good to remember that once in a while. And I think about that in cannabis, I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do, but I'm definitely not the best at it. There's lots of people that are way better at this than I am. And, even being pretty good at it is just like, it wouldn't matter to the world in the slightest bit in the long run of things if I left and went into a different career, like it just wouldn't matter.
We'd miss you.
It mattered to you guys. But I think about that all the time. And it's kind of liberating once you realize that, right? You're just like, oh yeah, just like my involvement in this whole area is so much less important than it can seem like on a day-to-day basis. And when you realize that, you're like, okay, like then it really is just about making, smart decisions for our lives and the lives of the people around us.
Focus on happiness always.
That is really it.
It's got to be the goals, right? If we're not trying to be happy, what are we doing?
You guys, thank you so much. This is such a great conversation, just not just about cannabis cultivation, but about life. So really appreciate Bryan and Tyler for being on with us today. So now we're going to change things up a little bit. If you guys follow us on Instagram, we invited you to post your best cultivation crop steering question. And if they are selected today, you'll be entered into a raffle to win an AROYA Go, as well as a Front Row Ag commercial bundle or craft bundle. Bryan, tell us about that.
Yeah, so in addition to the AROYA Go system, we'd like to provide either our commercial bundle, which is 3 bags, 25-pound bags for Part A, 2 bags of our Part B, 2 bags of our Part Bloom. That's our traditional setup for a smaller scale commercial, or our craft grower bundle, which is going to be our 5-pound bags of A, B, and Bloom, in addition to our ancillary products. And we really just look to earn the opportunity to interact, show you what we do with our onboarding process, the way that we give dedicated account management to our cultivation managers, and how we try to do things a little bit different as a nutrient company.
Amazing. All right. So thank you to everybody who dropped your questions. They were all outstanding, and we're just going to put them in the question bank and try to get to as many of them as we can over time. But we did pick 3 questions for today. I'm going to go ahead and ask the first one. This one came from Tongue Stainer. They ask, how important are the effects of temperature differential in both veg and flower? And what kind of role does it play or influence during crop steering, if any? So throwing that to the whole panel.
Who wants it first?
Go ahead.
All right, I'll take it. Super important. Actually, when we lower that temperature, plants, they don't produce a lot of their own internal heat. There's some, but they're not warm-blooded like you or I. They're not burning calories to maintain a constant level of metabolism. So Like in veg, for instance, if we run an overnight diff, that's going to slow down overall metabolic rate. So if we're looking at trying to shorten up our veg time to the shortest possible time we can put a plant in there and get a satisfactory result, which is our goal in a commercial application, we're not going to run a big overnight diff. And that's also why we don't really recommend a big overnight differential during generative stretch, because, as much as we talk about plant stress, we're trying to influence that plant to grow with a certain morphology, but we actually still want it to grow at like the maximum rate possible. Like we're slowing down cellular stretch, but we're still trying to keep up cellular division, produce more nodes, and still achieve a certain plant size. So, that's a technique that some double stack growers have employed over the years, doing a 5 to 10 degree differential during generative stretch. That's not ideal, but that's a solution for them when they have 48 inches of overhead room. And, they're already trying to flip plants right after they have roots, basically, 7 to 10 day veg. But that's not optimal. Once we're going later into the flowering cycle, we start to introduce that differential. And that helps us bring out maturity in the plant, because the plants evolved for millions of years to, bloom in the summer, late summer, heading into fall. It's got a natural response, not only a natural response, but physiologically too. When we slow that metabolism down overnight, we're also slowing a lot of the metabolic growth processes. So part of where that purple comes in, for instance, is we're slowing down everything the plant can do at night to build up resistance to that high light. So that's like, when we're looking at really getting that color, we're looking at really slowing down those processes. That anthocyanins coming out, it's helping protect the plant from the high light levels we're still exposing it to in the daytime. It's, a suntan's not a direct correlation between us and the plant, but kind of similar. And it's important to understand what the action is. It's not quite as simple as like, hey, the plant senses its fall, so it's doing a thing. And that's where, we were just talking about ego earlier, like start reading more and more and more about plant physiology. One of the best things you can do is pick up a book that has nothing to do with cannabis and just talks about plant biology. That way you can start to see, hey, what am I seeing here? I ran a little bit lower differential or higher differential in stretch. Let's say I tried to run 10 degrees. Compared to last run, my plants grew slower. Now, there's that light bulb moment where you're starting to connect plant processes to actual morphological changes that you're seeing. We could probably go on a lot about temperature if we want to, but those differentials are hugely important, and don't discount, how important they are, especially when we started talking earlier about, humidity capacity, for instance, or dehumidification capacity. Like, hey, you're not getting your purple. Well, hey man, if you go to 65, you mold out your whole crop. That's also not worth it.
Minimizing risk.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for that. Question number 2 was submitted from Deer in the Garden. They wrote, how dry can we go with drybacks without interfering with plant physiological growth responses?
Yeah. I love this question, mostly because I love talking about matrix potential. And that's really the answer, right? It's going to depend on the substrate that you're working with. Because what's going on there with matrix potentials, it's the vacuum that the roots have to apply to the substrate in order to draw water out of it, right? And so in most all substrates, as we decrease in water content, we're going to have a lower value for our matrix potential. That's because it's a vacuum, so it's a negative pressure. And at a certain matrix potential, we're going to hit temporary wilting point. If we keep going farther without getting a refreshment of water, we're going to hit permanent wilting point, right? And so obviously, there are certain strategies, especially in traditional agriculture, where we're using irrigation deficits in order to hit that right on that level of temporary wilting point, right? For most hydroponic substrates, we're not quite there. And that's where we're using things like osmotic differential to help and environmental parameters to help do the steering of that crop to, influence a hormonal response, get that plant to react physiologically so that we get the desired morphology out of it. And so, those levels are, like I said, very specific to the type of substrate that you're working in. Obviously, when we're looking at something like rock wool, it is very, very low in water content. Typically, we're talking about under 10, under 5%. for rock wool, and those are the ranges that we're going to be seeing hydrophobic properties develop in the rock wool, and that's a pretty big no. I think unless we're in the last just few days of the cycle, that's going to be a serious hindrance for our ability to get back up to field capacity and stay on the type of steering strategies, the irrigation schedules that we have developed for it. And then things for like cocoa is usually going to be a little bit higher when we see that matrix potential. It actually has a little bit of an elbow in the curves when we graph matrix potential versus water content. And, another thing there is little slight differences in cocoa depending on our pith chip manufacturer. But usually, we start to see those matrix potentials decrease quickly, become more negative quickly, typically in that anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the type of cocoa.
Yeah, it's important to note, once we hit that hockey stick or the elbow in that matrix potential curve, we're hitting a point where we're past efficiency for the plant. So we're not, we're actually losing energy comparatively dipping into that territory. And there's oftentimes not a real benefit to really running things to the ragged edge of temporary wilting point. And that's why we always say, or I say it a lot. We always say plant stress.
I don't.
We don't. There's a lot of wordage in the industry about that, and we're actually not trying to stress it. It's more like working out. You don't want to go to the gym and work out until you're dead for the next week. You want to work out till you put a little bit of that appropriate work into those muscles, get just enough effect, and then actually have a good recovery time. If you I haven't been running away from my problems every day. So if I go run 10 miles tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a bad week, right? I should probably go run a mile. And that's, plants are kind of the same way. And we have such a short time period we're growing these things, 60 to 70 days in flower max. Each day is way more than 1% of that plant's, productive life cycle that we're focusing on, even if we include veg. So anytime we dip out of efficiency range, and that's at either end of the spectrum, whether we're talking about water content, EC, we're leaving grams on the table, or we're leaving quality, one of the two, right?
Yeah, that's really well said. I don't really have anything to add to that, other than just there's a couple of really great papers out there that show these curves that we're describing, where you can see the the substrate, the differences in different substrates and how low the water content can go, and they'll still yield water. And just like these guys said, it's like if you ever get down so low that the plant can't get water out of the substrate, well, you've not only have you harmed the plant, but long before that, you've harmed your substrate. And it's just I think our tendency is a lot of the time, when people learn about crop steering and drybacks, is to think okay, well, a little bit of dryback, that's good. So we'll just go more extreme and we'll get even better results. And that is most definitely not the case. It's just this is another application of upside downside risk, where your upside potential of pushing your drybacks a little bit farther is really, really small. It's is applying a tiny bit more stress going to get you a little bit better stacking or something like that? I don't know. It just seems trivial amount of increase. But the downside potential, if you do that, is maybe you just dropped, you went too low early, in your week 2 of flower in your rock wool, and you dropped your field capacity, or your effective field capacity, or the volume of substrate that's even accessible to the plant roots for the rest of the cycle. And you just handicapped your yield, your maximum potential yield, by 25%. So just I think it's a really important area to think about this. Just, is it worth the risk trying to push to really, really low water content levels?
Yeah. Focus more on the minimum you want to achieve, that 10 to 15% more than the maximum end, because that's so dependent on plant and pot size and what media you're in. And I think there's a lot of hype around just the term dryback because we're putting numbers on it. It's something measurable, and it's not kind of this oh, hey, the room's, how does it feel? This isn't how it feels. It's a number. And, man, whether it's yields, potency, or drybacks, we all want to brag about a big number, right? That's it's just what it is.
Don't irrigate till your pot feels like this.
Yeah.
I dry back 110% of the way every time. That's how you do it.
Getting after it. That's a lot of crop steering you added.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And actually, on that note, we got one more question to ask. And this one came from Ashley. I think it's IPA Christensen. They wrote, based on your experience, what are the most common challenges growers face when implementing crop steering? Can you offer any practical tips for troubleshooting these issues?
Probably understanding uniformity and consistency would probably be the ones that I would approach first, and it's something that we work with clients to make sure that they have addressed before they do any purposeful crop steering changes to their existing program. If I have a large deviation across the population of my plants, when I start crop steering, we are going to get some plants that dry back too far, and we're going to jeopardize the substrate. If I have some certain clogged emitters across the room, I might start to get into EC ranges that really are not desirable, and or those water content issues. What does the spatial variation of my room temperatures or humidities look like? And so for me, it would be, all right, well, let's take a snapshot right now, understand what is the uniformity. Obviously, since most production facilities are working with clones, we kind of got a leg up on typical biological analytics. Simply because they are closely related in their genetic makeup. So that is helpful. But then obviously we have factors of, what is the consistency of our substrates? What is the consistency of our processes? Are we really good at cutting clones? And then it kind of comes down to the consistency over time. Can we do those processes repeatedly on a day-to-day basis? And then can we do them on a run-to-run basis? And if both of those are in good shape, then, it is time to start saying, let's push the envelope of crop steering so that we can improve what we've built on.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, if your data is not of high enough quality to make decisions on reliably, then it doesn't matter if you have the perfect crop steering protocol, it's going to fail. And the uniformity and consistency is so key to make sure that, we can't have a sensor in every single plant, unfortunately. We're taking yeah. All right. That's a good deal right there. But most people, you're not going to get a sensor for every single plant. So you're taking a very limited sample and you're hoping that it reflects the overall average of the room and the plants with not a huge amount of variation from plant to plant. And if for some reason, any of those things that you mentioned, like drippers, substrate, initial starting conditions for the substrate, wind, air movement, light intensity, all of those things, if they're not, decently uniform so that the data you're looking at on your screen is representative of what most of the plants are experiencing, then your crop steering is just not going to work.
Oh, absolutely. Personally, I think reliability of your system, redundancy, and good human decision making are probably the three biggest things that people battle. That's something that, with our salespeople over the years, we've definitely coached them a little bit. Like, hey guys, so here's this thing. You'll sell someone a 50 grand system, and then a month later, I tell them to spend another 100 grand on their irrigation to redo the whole thing in the facility. So it's kind of led to this idea, like, hey, we want data, absolutely, but start to think about the things that really, really are problems in your facility. So number one, data is going to help you a lot identify those. But sometimes if you just do a little bit of reading, a little bit of looking around, maybe have a buddy come over and check out your place versus theirs, you might be able to find something like, hey, we do need the data, but our VPDs at 0.8 is as high as we can ever get it. Okay, well, you can't crop steer in that situation, you are always crop steering, but you're steering towards a poor result if you can't get your VPD above, 1.2, 1.3 in the daytime minimum. So, hey, solve that problem, Don't think that there's one magic bullet here. It's a very holistic system. And your responsibility as an operator, if you want to stay in this the long run, is to think sustainably and really, really minimize any of those risk chances. It's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time here, is minimizing risk. There's a lot of us out there that have gone to okay, what's your business model? Do you sell joints and extracts? Okay, don't prune it up. Why? Well, you're running 14 strains. You've got new people coming through all the time. you're probably losing more by trying to teach them to do every strain perfectly than you would be harvesting a little B and C grade and throwing it to extract. You know, and that's a hard decision to make, right? Because then you walk into that room and it doesn't look just on point. You know, you're like, this is a little overgrown, a little messy. You know, I want this room to look cleaner, but hey, okay, the dollars and cents add up. You know, I'm paying people to throw away product. That sucks. I'll stop doing that. And like I said, that's right back to that ego thing. We all want to walk into a beautiful room every single day. And sometimes, hey, problems happen.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for answering those questions. So I have minimized risk and put those 3 names into a hat so we could pick a winner right now, live in the show. So let's see, who's it going to be? All right, Deer in the Garden, asking how dry can we go with dry backs? Congratulations. You just won. So we're going to reach out to you on Instagram, get your contact info, send you some real goodies. Really excited. Thank you again to everybody who entered. And thank you guys for answering these wonderful questions. What an awesome show. Thank you so much for joining us, Tyler and Bryan from Front Row Ag, being a part of our 100th episode. Let the folks know where to find you guys. Website, Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram, front_row_ag and frontrowag.com. And check out our technician training. That's free for any customer, frontrowag.com. You can get linked through there. And additional questions that you may have for Tyler, you can reach us through there through a commercial application.
All right. Fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm available through Front Row Ag through those channels. Also my Instagram, Tyler_incognita. You can just see some of the stuff I post up on there.
Oh, and it's glorious. You want to follow that for sure. All right. And then one more announcement before we go. Be sure to check out our AROYA Go and AROYA course specials this month only. Contact our sales team at sales@aroya.io to learn more. All right. With that, thank you, Jason, Seth, producer Chris, for an epic 100th session. I am grateful to be on this journey with such an awesome team. And we want to thank all the Gromies so much for joining us for this week's AROYA office hours and all of them. We could not do this without you. To learn more about AROYA, book a demo at aroya.io, and our team will show you the ins and outs of the ultimate cannabis cultivation platform. If you have any crop steering or cultivation questions you want us to cover, and we have so many in the bank, thanks y'all. Drop them anytime in the AROYA app. Email us at sales@aroya.io and or send us a DM via Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you. If you're a fan of the pod, please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your feedback, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Thanks, y'all. See you at episode 101. Take care. Bye.